fabulous in the entire world of the circus than the great Wallendas. Led by Carl Wallenda, they represent 4 generations of high wire performers. Tino, age 11, followed by his mother, Jenny, followed by sisters and brothers and cousins and uncles and aunts.
A lot of the sense of the awe of performing, the joy of performing, the commitment to performing, the attitude of a performer. Most of that I got from the years that I spent with my grandfather.
But the great specialty of the great Wallendas is their 3-high pyramid. The circus program describes the act as hazardous and hair-raising exploits at dizzy heights by the most consistently thrilling daredevils in circus history.
Back in 1962 was the predecessors of our ancestors, but of course the modern day Wallendas are still doing basically the same things. Recreating 7-person pyramids, 4-person pyramids. That's because we've been in the circus now for 200 years. In the beginning, traveling from city to city, circus family, doing all kinds of things. But this is actually our 100th anniversary this year of the Wallendas performing on the high wire, which was originally founded, the high wire, by my grandfather, Carl Wallenda, that you saw there just a little bit earlier. That is our 8-person pyramid that we did for Guinness Book of World Records, and this was our recreation of our 4-person, 3-level pyramid that we are the most proud of because it was the most difficult trick that our family ever did. And by the way, let me just take a moment to take any responsibility for any confusion here this morning. I can tell you that because of me, I'm responsible for 2 pastors losing their jobs at their churches. One of them lost his job at 2 different churches because he had me in. So, Pastor, I don't want to give you any warning, but you never know what might happen. That's the typical day-to-day stuff that we do because we don't consider ourselves to be daredevils per se. We have very carefully trained and practiced our feats so that we can do them with little effort and with great confidence. But there have been times that we've been called to go and do some things that even we think may be a daredevil type thing. Take, for instance, in 1987, I was going to perform at a Rocky Mountain Spring Festival in Denver, Colorado. They wanted to make some kind of a big splash before the festival started, so they called me in a couple of months early. They wanted me to do some kind of a walk between 2 buildings. So we drove around the city of Denver, and as we came to where the Denver Mint is, I looked down the street, and at the very end is the DNF Tower, spectacularly building that sits at the end of the block there. It has 1 balcony on the 13th floor, and it immediately occurred to me that would be the ideal place, picturesque place, to be able to do this kind of a stunt. We got approval to go into the building, went up to the 13th floor. Now, I say 13th floor because I was standing on 12 stories, and in my mind, I immediately calculated that it would be 10 feet each story. 12 stories would be 120 feet, which would be pretty much of a typical walk for me. And this would be the type of place that you would want to do it because you want to have the newspapers come out and take pictures and have them appear on the front page, which actually happened at the end. You want the TV stations to come out and cover the story and do a nice little short pieces, which they did. You even want the radio stations to be talking about it. So, as we're standing there on the balcony, we're looking off to the left. There's the Intercontinental Hotel. I'm thinking maybe that'd be a place where we could string the cable to. And there were some other buildings around that were possibilities. So we began talking about how this would take place. And as we were driving to the airport, the promoters were saying, well, we'll have to get a permit from the city of Denver. We're going to have to talk to the Intercontinental Hotel. We're going to have to talk to different buildings to see which ones will allow you to string a cable to them. As I left the car, I was saying, you know, if something goes wrong and none of these buildings want to allow it, we could put a crane down on one end of the block by the Denver Mint, and I'll run the cable from the crane to the building. So they went about the process of that taking place, but I also needed to get a particular permission about being able to do this stunt because it was out of the ordinary. It wasn't what I practiced for. I was capable of it, but I just wanted to make sure. And so I asked God to give me some revelation of whether I could go ahead with it or not. I'm not sure how God speaks to you. Some people say God has spoken to them in an audible voice. I can tell you that I've never actually heard the voice of God, but he does speak to me very quietly within my heart, but generally it's through his word. And a few days later, as I was going through my daily reading, it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. I didn't flip the Bible open to say this verse, that verse. I opened it up to the place where I was reading was Psalm 62. And what stood out to me was the second verse, which says, my honor and my salvation depend on God. Now that spoke to me and gave me the permission to go ahead. So I immediately called Denver, and I said, everything's set on my side. I am able to do this walk. And they said that everything's going well, the permits, they've already received the permits. But the problem is that the Intercontinental Hotel wouldn't allow them to string the cable there, none of the other buildings. In fact, there's a row of little shops down that I would be walking by, and they said, don't let this guy walk over me because if something happens to him, we don't want to be responsible. They said, what we can do, though, is, as you said, we'll put a crane at the end of the block that'll make the walk 320 feet across. I said, that's fine. I've got the cable we need to do that. They said, the problem is that the crane that we can get, the tallest crane that we can get, is only 169 feet tall. So my mind went back. I'm standing on 13 floors, 10 feet each floor. That is 120 feet. I couldn't understand why they were talking about the crane could only go up to 169. That's just good and well. But every time we spoke about it, and they hired an engineer to make sure that I knew what I was talking about how we would set everything up, they kept bringing up the crane only being able to go up a height of 169 feet. Well, what happened was the day that I arrived there, they had a big press conference with the TV stations, the radio stations, the newspapers. And the first thing that this promoter said was, Tino is going to walk a cable stretched in front of the Denver Mint, 320 feet in length long, from a crane 169 feet in the air to the DNF tower 179 feet in the air. Well, I began to wonder immediately, again, thinking back, 13 stories, 10 feet each story. Well, immediately at the end of the press conference, I tapped the promoter on the show and said, what is all this talk about 169 feet to 179 feet? The crane only needs to be 120 feet in the air. And while I'm talking, the engineer taps me on my shoulder and says, Tino, you don't understand. You see, this is a very old building. The first few floors are 15 feet each. Thereafter, they are 12.5 feet. Well, you with this German hardhead here, do I look German? Probably not. I know I don't. At any rate, that's because of my mixed background, but whatever. I went to the DNF tower, to the 13th floor, threw a 100-foot tape measure over the end, let it dangle down there, went all the way down to the floor, outside, fully expecting that that tape measure would almost be maybe 20 feet off the ground, but it actually only came about halfway down. It really was 179 feet tall. Well, so I had to completely rethink everything that was going on. In fact, even my part of the engineering, because you see, about every 30 feet, I have 2 ropes coming down to either side, kind of like this brace that's here. And what that does is 2 men hold those, and it stabilizes the wire from shifting from side to side. So I had to get some more rope because I didn't figure on that length. And we got everything ready. The next morning, very early, we came back, set up the wire, stretched it between the DNF tower and the crane, and put the ropes on, got everything prepared. And as I was getting ready, I'd gotten dressed, my wife came up to me and she said, you know, the paramedics are asking what your blood type is. So I said, if something happens to me, they might as well try to give a transfusion to a squashed mosquito. I approached the rigging, and before I did that, I talked to these 20 men, because there were 10 ropes, that were going to hold these ropes, and explained to them how crucial their job was, although it was a simple thing, wasn't difficult. They just needed to make sure those ropes were taut so the wire wouldn't move side to side. I climbed up to the, actually I didn't climb, they had a skiff that took me up to the, where the wire was set up, and as I approached the wire, I talked to the audience, which was people who had just basically come by or had heard about the walk and they wanted to watch, and I explained to them all the walks that I'd done in the past. I explained to them how long I'd been performing on the wire, what my career was all about, my qualifications. I also added that I was confident in doing this because my honor and my salvation depended on God. I quoted those verses. So as I picked up the pole and started my trek out onto the wire, I noticed that those first 2 ropes were just a little bit loose. So with my wireless microphone, I called down to the men. I said, gentlemen, the wire is not quite taut. Could you please tighten up on those 2 ropes? I looked back at the wire, nothing happened. Sometimes when you have a team, some people don't listen. I approached a second set of ropes. It seemed kind of loose as well. Gentlemen, could you please pull down on those ropes so the wire will be more steady? Well, nothing seemed to happen again. I crossed over that second set of ropes, and as I was getting up to the 3rd set, it was worse than the first 2. Gentlemen, could you please pull on those 2 ropes? The wire is not very tight. Well, all of a sudden, it occurred to me, because there was a little flutter in the line, but nothing really happened. It occurred to me that I'd made a big blunder, because the fact was that the little area that the men had to spread out below was about 100 feet in either direction. Now, that's fine for a walk 120 feet in the air. The problem is that I was almost twice that height. So instead of being kind of a 45-degree angle over here, they were almost the ropes straight up and down. There was no way that those men could hold that wire tight or taut. At this point, my mind is reeling. My face is turning yellow, orange, green, all kinds of colors. My back is beginning to ache already because of the adrenaline starting to pump through my body. And I'm thinking, what can I do? Maybe I should walk all the way back, those 3 but you see, I'd already come this far. Didn't make any sense. So I continued on. The 4th rope, 5th, 6th rope, 7th rope. By the time I'm here, the adrenaline was pumping so hard through my body that I had this very severe pain all the way up my spine. My arms were aching from from what was going on. And so I thought, you know what, maybe what I could do is, maybe I will kind of sit down and rest a moment and then continue. But I realized if I did that, because of the pain that I had, I'd never be able to get up again. Then I thought, maybe I can drop the pole down to the ground and come down one of those ropes. But the problem with that is that the rope is made of a very brittle material called polypropylene. Also, it was very thin. And I realized that if I did that, I probably wouldn't be able to climb to the bottom. My hands would be severely burned, and I would have to let go. And of course, the end result would be just as tragic. Well, I'm sure you're wondering what may have happened. And I've got the evidence of what happened, which you're going to show on this video right now.
This afternoon, and we do mean high. A member of the famous Wallenda High Wire Act kept a noontime crowd on 16th Street spellbound. But Barbara Berlin reports this particular feat also kept the entertainer on edge.
Tino Wallenda is the third generation of a tightrope walking family, a family whose fame has been built on death-defying high wire acts, no safety nets below. But for Tino, the groundwork is most important. He checks and rechecks every aspect of the setup. It's the only way Tino feels safe.
I've got a lot of capable help, but I'm overseeing the whole thing. Everything has been very carefully calculated in this particular walk, so I'm very confident everything will go real well.
This Denver appearance also marks Tino's highest walk ever attempted, a balancing act that will take him 170 feet above a skeptical crowd.
I don't think he's going to make it.
There's too much wind up there. It's going to blow him off.
I'm just wondering why they don't have any nets down here.
Not complete confidence, but I think he'll make it, yeah.
Every time you get up on something that's oversized like this, it can be a little bit of a fright because it's the unknown that you're dealing with.
Then nearly halfway there, Tino's confidence and concentration were momentarily broken by sounds of the city.
Going through my mind, of course, the videotape of my grandfather when he fell about 9 years ago in Puerto Rico. It was a similar situation where the wire was wiggling very violently. That thought of that picture, just watching him doing that fall, kept going through my mind. My salvation and my safety and my honor depended on God, and I believed that he was going to take me across.
To a cheer from below, Tino Wallenda got his feet again on solid ground. But certainly not forever. In fact, he'll be back on the high wire daily during the Rocky Mountain Spring Festival, and his first appearance is tomorrow. Barbara Berlin, Channel 2 News.
Reminds you of the old saying, feet don't fail me now. That'll do it for Channel 2 News.
Yeah, quite appropriate. Feet don't fail me now, but obviously, as you see, I made it all the way across from one side to the other. But what I'm here this morning to tell you is not all of this stuff that you saw me on that pipe or the fact that I successfully made it, but there were 4 very important lessons about my faith that I learned that particular day. The first one was that I could be encouraged by those who have gone before. See, my grandfather was a great source of encouragement to me, and he lived by that old adage that I'm sure you've heard sometime or another, which simply says the show must go on. But he really put it into practice. In 1962, we had a tragic accident as we were doing our 7-person pyramid that we're going to see right now. This isn't the actual from 1962, but it's to give you an idea of what it is all about. Now, we had done it successfully, the family, for 16 years without incident. In fact, during an earthquake in South America, the Wallendas were in the middle of the wire and made it all the way across. Another time, the lights went out as they were practicing the 7, 35 feet in the air. And They successfully, lights came back on. They were still going. They made it all the way across to the other side. But in 1962, the front man, who was the newest member of the family holding that position, shouted out in German, "Ich kann nicht mehr halten." I can't hold it anymore. He threw his balancing pole and tried to grab the wire, and as he did that, the entire pyramid pressed on his back, throwing him to the ground 35 feet below. The second man, getting the weight on his back, was also thrown all the way to the ground. The third man, when he landed on the wire, the force was so great that his balancing pole split in half, spinning him off to the ground. The only man left standing was at the very rear. My grandfather was in the top position in the front, second position there, second level. As he went down, and he was able to clutch the wire, and the girl who was seated on the top of him on the chair fell on his back, and somehow miraculously was able to hold on to her until they could get a makeshift net underneath, which was nothing more than a carpet that they had laying in the center ring. As the men held it and as the girl fell into it, they weren't able to hold it, and she suffered a severe concussion. My grandfather, because he caught her, cracked pelvis and a double hernia. The three men that fell to the ground obviously fared much worse. Two of them died that night. The third one, my Uncle Mario, he survived, but they didn't give him much hope that he would live. He was paralyzed for the rest of his life from the waist down. So what do you do with The Show Must Go On in a situation like that? My grandfather in the hospital, cracked pelvis, double hernia, two family members already dead, his son in a room next to him, not knowing whether he would survive or not. His daughter walked up to him, and in his face, she called him a murderer. The patriarch of the family, the one who put each one in their place, he must have felt a great deal of responsibility of what happened. But he forced them to release him from the hospital that morning. And that afternoon at 1:30, he was in costume, up on the wire, doing his best for the audience. Why? Not because he seeked glory, but because the show must go on. And that's just another way of saying life continues. You can't give up. You have to keep going. And that's been basically the emblem or the motto of my family all these years. But, you know, in Hebrews chapter 12, the first verse, it starts off by saying, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses." See, my grandfather was a witness to me among many other performers that the show must go on, that life continues, was a valid viewpoint to hold. But within the Bible, within the pages of this book, if you've read it much at all, you've read how many of our forebears have lost their lives. Why? Because they held up their faith and wouldn't give up. Since the Bible has been put together, if you could read books like Fox's Book of Martyrs or other books and see where believers have suffered and died horrible persecution, horrible death because of their faith in Jesus Christ. And I dare say if you even read the newspapers, you can see that it's not done. It's not over. In fact, I am told, or I've read, that we're more in a situation of persecution and murdered for our faith in this day and age, even though we don't sense it, we don't feel it here in our United States, and we're absolutely blessed because of that. But you see, we can be surrounded, we can take hope from those people who have gone before. The second thing that I learned is it's easier to keep going than it is to go back. Now again, going back to my grandfather, here's a short little clip of a walk that he did in Miami, Florida at the Fontainebleau Hotel, and it was probably one of his most difficult walks that he ever did. You can see how he's struggling with the wind, struggling with his balance to get across. And that is the kind of thing that makes me realize why I need to take a stand as a performer, and why the show must go on is an absolutely valid point for me. Because it was easier for him to keep going than it was to go back. In fact, I know you're having a series now on heritage, and legacy is part of heritage, but somebody recently enlightened me on that, because he said that legacy is not something that's given to you, not something that you inherit, but legacy is something that is put in you. The show must go on. Hebrews 12, the second part of that first verse, says, "Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." A little further on, it says that we should endure hardship or hardness as a disciple or as discipline. And it also says that God disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. One thing that seems like we want to forget is the word disciple and discipline have the same root. And if you truly are a disciple of Jesus Christ, there's going to be some discipline. And the word discipline, if you look at the root meaning, it's talking about being stung. So if you're stung, if you're being disciplined, look for the hidden meaning behind that. It also says that we should consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. One of my favorite authors that I quote often is Oswald Chambers. And he says that we should not pray against circumstances, but that we would pray that God would change me to face circumstances. And God doesn't change my life. He changes me to face life. Isaiah tells us, if you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. Now, the third thing I learned was I needed to remember my training. When I first went on the wire when I was only 7 years old, my grandfather taught me that I needed to fix my attention, that I should focus on an unmoving point, because that's where I get my balance. If I start to get distracted in the circus by noises or maybe people moving around, I'll have a tendency to lose my focus and thereby losing my balance. Of course, that could result in great tragedy. I needed to remember my training. But in my faith, I need to remember my training as well, because Hebrews 12, verse 2 tells us that we need to fix our eyes on Jesus, because he is the author and the perfecter of our faith. You see, he put it together. He wrote it. He's the author. But not only did he do that, he came to the earth and lived among us for 30-some years and showed us how it might be worked out, how we may be able to live our life that way. He didn't just author it, he made it perfect. The last thing that I learned was that I wasn't alone. You know, I told you about those 20 men that were holding those ropes. And they were doing the best they could, but they couldn't do enough. And as I got towards the middle of that wire, and you saw the wire moving under my feet, at some point it doesn't show it, but the wire was moving 4 to 6 inches either way under my feet. And I called down and I said to the crowd, you saw the crowd that was there, I said, I need a little bit of help. The men can't steady the wire enough. Could I ask some of you to step out of your place of watching this event and actually become part and hold the ropes, help to hold the ropes? Now, there were men who were on business trips that day from one side of the city to the other with, who knows, untold valuable documents in their briefcases. They put them down, and They reached over and grabbed the hold of the ropes and held on. There were women on shopping trips, all beautifully made up, makeup and high heels and beautiful clothes. They put their purses down, and they reached out and grabbed the hold. On each rope, there was like 8 to 10 people holding those ropes. Well, let me tell you, that wire was still moving, but it wasn't moving. It was moving. I could control the amount it was moving. They were holding it just right that I was able to make it all the way across. The second part of the 12th chapter, second verse says, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Let me just say that those people helped me, and I've got people that have prayed for me throughout my entire life. I remember as a little, I understand as a little boy, our neighbors, they prayed for my sister and I as we went off to school every day, that we would get to know who Jesus was and that we would be kept safe. And it paid off, and I dare say, I know there's lots of people that have prayed for me through the years, and I dare say there's people in your life that are praying for you, some that you don't even know. But ultimately, even when nobody else cared about me, or at least I didn't think they did, Jesus Christ was there and cared for me. And this says that Jesus endured the cross, scorned the shame, and then he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Do you think that the reason that Jesus had joy was because he realized that when this was all over, his duty or his job that he was doing, that he would be going back to heaven where he came from in the first place? No. You see, the joy that was set before him was knowing that a tightrope walker one day would have eternity in heaven with him, that a carpenter would do the same, that a doctor would do the same, that a pastor would do the same, that you would also have that opportunity, that he went to the cross, and the joy that set before him was knowing that he would give eternal life to me and to you. See, I don't deserve it. 100% I don't deserve it. I've failed God so often. My goodness. I've questioned him so often. See, I'm nothing more than I'm a sinner. Which simply means that I don't live up to God's standards or his expectations, because God is completely perfect. He can't do anything wrong, and I'm completely the opposite. I can hardly do anything right except maybe walk on that tightrope. But you see, even though I can't do anything right, and I've missed the mark with God, he hit the mark 100%. And when he died on the cross, he paid the price for every mistake, every sin that I've ever made. Not only that, but 3 days later, he rose from the dead, that I and that you might have eternal life. And you see, the scripture speaks to me every day. It says, today is the day. Today is the day to take one step closer and further. Not sure where you're at. Maybe this has been your church for years and years, but maybe you're not quite sure if you know Jesus Christ or not. Maybe this is just an odd time you're here just to see some crazy guy on a tightrope. Today is the day you can receive Jesus Christ. But basically, and for sure, today is the day that we can each take a step deeper in faith. That we can take a step deeper in our relationship with Jesus Christ. Because the thing is that he desires to have fellowship. That means communion. We take communion. I don't know how often you take it here. Maybe once a month, maybe once every 3 months, whatever it is. Communion, we commune with one another. I like a lot of times, I'm sorry, Pastor, I'm going off here, and I'm... A lot of churches, we have the communal cup. I don't mind that at all. The funny thing is you come up and you get to the next guy, well, I don't want to take from that cup because of that guy that's in front of me because of the way he might be dressed, because of the way he looks. Jesus Christ came to have communion with each one of us, no matter how we're dressed, no matter what our lives are, no matter how far we've gone off track. He wants to have communion, and that means personal communion. You know, last night, Pastor and I, we went out and had something to eat. Last time I was here, let me tell you, Pastor, last time I was here, somehow you disappeared at the end of the service. And I thought, well, that guy probably, you know, he's too much of a big shot. He doesn't care. But last night, I went out with him and his daughter, and we just had a great time because we're having communion together. We're getting to know each other. I don't want to scare you by coming out in the seats like this. But I want to have communion with you, brother. Brother, communion. Sister, I want to have communion. Listen, we're going to spend eternity together if we know Jesus Christ. But the first step to that is knowing him and the power of his resurrection. Oh, I don't want to get into it. It's a whole other sermon because it goes on to say, and fellowshipping with him in his death. You don't want to know about that now. But if you were in Afghanistan, you would want to know that. Communion. Jesus desires fellowship and communion. I'm going to leave you with that. But you know, if you haven't ever received Jesus Christ, today is the day. And you can get together with one of the leaders here of the church, part of the pastoral chapter, somebody that you trust. Because if you really want to come across the line, it's not a matter of some churches I go to, we come up and they line up here on the pew, you know, and they confess their sins and want to ask you. I've been places where the same people come up over and over and get saved over and over. It doesn't work that way. It's not about the visual sign. It's about what's happening in your heart right now, right here. Communion. Jesus desires communion. Oh, Holy Father, I thank you. I thank you for your presence. I thank you for your touch in our lives. I thank you for the fact that we live in a country where we can just worship freely and we can just come to church and just speak your name. But Father, help us to realize that that comes with an obligation, that we need to step over that line and commune with you. And so, Father, Holy Spirit, I pray that this morning and through the day you would touch each individual here in some way within their hearts, letting them know how real you are, how much you want to commune with them, and open the door, Lord. Have them open the door. Revelation says, you stand at the door of our hearts and you knock. And if we'll open the door, you will come in and have fellowship. You'll have communion with us. We'll get to know you and you will know us. Although you know us, but we'll get to know you better. So, Lord, let it be. Today is the day. Amen.